You're listening to a Monster Kid podcast.
Why don't we rent a video tonight?
Yeah, can we please?
On a weeknight?
Yeah, come on, Mom. It's okay.
Sure, come on. Let's throw caution to the wind.
Put a little weekend in your week. Rent a video.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Vericon Video, a show where we relive forgotten and unforgettable movies that once lined the shelves of video stores everywhere. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Jordan.
And today, the sun is shining.
But the ice is slippery.
Just like Alec Baldwin's performance.
Yeah, he's here running around with a big schnoz ripping off his face, cackling in the breeze.
Meanwhile, another yellow apparel madman is running amok, drinking whiskey, and commenting on neckties as Tim Curry's all over the place, and Ian McKellen stands around with nothing to do. This might be the first movie we've covered that gets us some mail. We're talking The Shadow from 1994. So sit back, relax, and welcome.
Welcome to the Cafe 80s, where it's always morning in America, even in the afternoon.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I have the only gun on board. Welcome to Con Air.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Okay, good evening, America, and welcome aboard Apollo 13.
I'm so glad you could come. This is going to be such an exciting day. I hope you're enjoying it. I think you will.
With the aid of a new female friend with psychic abilities, a playboy millionaire with a dark past sets out to bring the evil Shawan Khan to justice, a foe who will not surrender without a fight. So memories and connections of this movie. Let's start with you, Jordan. What are some of your general connections to The Shadow?
So preparing for this episode was my first watch of this movie, but I was always kind of aware of it in the sort of 90s serial blockbuster craze that was. I always used to get this one confused with Billy Zane.
Oh, The Phantom.
But the one thing I remembered about this movie is that the very striking poster art that it came with, where it was literally just the tagline of, who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it was just the logo of just the shadow. I posted this on Twitter, but whenever there's like just a logo with some parts like blacked out or some parts more accent than others, you can end up looking in the wrong parts and seeing something that isn't really meant to be, the main image. Like I always saw a man in a fedora using a bamboo stick as a blow dart and shooting a man with a bag over his head that's 300 pounds who reacts in horror. So if you look at the poster for The Shadow, the main logo for it, and see that, congratulations, you're just as strange as me. But other than that, I didn't watch this movie until now. I've known it. Something about it was a little silly. I knew it was forgotten for a reason, and it always seemed interesting.
I have a history with this movie. I rented this a lot as a kid. I had most of the action figures, and this movie had a bit more resonance for me back then because I watched a lot of comedy shows from the 50s as a kid that would often reference The Shadow, as well as this one Heckle and Jekyll animated short called The Talking Magpies.
Oh, yeah.
That I had on video and watched a lot. But just to kind of contextualize my memories of it, this came out a year before Batman Forever. And I was high on Burton's Batman and Batman Returns, and I was hungry for more of that, and which is in a way is how they marketed The Shadow. Like, this appeared to be cut from the same cloth. And at the time, it sated my appetite for that, but it was pretty short-lived because, better stuff came along. And over the last few years of doing this show, I knew that covering this movie was inevitable because I, for one, personally associate it with my video store going experiences. And then two, I was really curious to see how it holds up. And so we'll be talking about that considerably.
Yeah, this is a very interesting movie to see 26 or 27 years later. Mm-hmm. Some aspects have held up really well, and some haven't. So,
right. We're not here to bash this movie at all. But we are certainly going to be very critical. As we usually are on this show. But I would like to say it's in a constructive way, or at least
we're not going to be slamming this movie over the head with a folding chair the entire time. There are things about this movie that do work. There are things that are very constructive, and there are perspectives to look at this movie that contribute to larger conversations that I think are really valuable. Mm-hmm. But at face value, this is, itself a singular meh to crappy kind of movie. And we have to sort of talk about some of the things that make it that, in addition to what makes it sort of interesting to talk about.
Exactly. And if you want to watch this movie, at the time of this recording, this is July 2021, it's streaming on HBO Max. You can also pick up a pretty bare bones Blu-ray. It's pretty cheap. It's put out by Shout Factory. Surprisingly, this is one of the few Shout Factory releases that I have that has so few bonus features. I mean, this one has a still gallery, a theatrical trailer, and new interviews with Alec Baldwin, Penelope Ann Miller, production designer and the DP, and David Koepp. But besides that, I mean, it's really just a few minutes of content. So, and this is, for the record, the collector's edition.
Ah, yes.
So, yeah.
It's sad that we couldn't get a Tim Curry commentary of this while he was pre-stroke.
Yeah, I know. And I did watch an interview with him when he was on tour, like promoting this movie. And I mean, he was singing the praises of this movie. Like he really, yeah. I mean, you can tell like he was really trying to frame this in such a way that made it sound interesting and fun and visually exciting. Like he talked a lot about how the DP worked and the costume design and all of this stuff and working with these great actors. And he was doing his job as far as like promoting the film.
Tim Curry knows, at the end of the day, he is a showman. He knows how to sell something, even be it in a movie or, promoting a movie.
Yeah.
And so, no, I mean, that's, I'm glad. He would even sell like, Loaded Weapon, or some of the other lesser ones.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously he sold the pants off of Muppet Treasure Island because he loved that experience.
Oh, right. I'm just glad that he's still alive.
Me too.
I mean, of course I am, but the fact that he's still able to participate in these conventions and stuff and greet his fans, like apparently he's still a big sweetheart and he loves his fans. So
yeah, there's a Twitter account that is confusingly called Not Tim Curry, but I think it's him. Like he's basically made it tricky and said, okay, it's actually not me, but it's very clearly him. And he literally just responds to people who tweet about Tim Curry. And just is very candid about his life and is very himself.
Yeah, I follow that account, and I was curious because there's so many like fake like parody accounts and stuff out there.
God, I have nothing but good things to say about Tim Curry. He's awesome, and we will definitely get to talk about him in this.
Yes,
mark my words.
All right, so let's give you guys a little bit of background on The Shadow. In 1982, producer Martin Bregman bought the rights to The Shadow. This is Martin Bregman of most of Pacino's career. He produced like Scarface, Carlito's Way.
Oh, the De Palma ones. Okay.
Yeah, and has worked with Mulcahy quite a bit. He's also produced Matilda and The Adventures of Pluto Nash.
Really?
I believe that's correct. I want to double check that. It was in development with Martin Bregman since at least 1983.
Oh, wow.
That's something.
So around the time he was doing this, he was trying to do Pluto Nash.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Wow.
But yeah, then through the 80s, Robert Zemeckis was involved in adapting the property for the big screen. And then Sam Raimi had a pitch, but it was rejected. So he made an arrangement with Universal to develop a project inspired by The Shadow called Darkman. And he was working on that as early as 1987. And of course, that film came out a few years later, spawned a couple of sequels, and has its own cult following.
Darkman is one that we've always attempted to do for like a commentary or like something like that. Yeah, it's a very cool movie.
It is a cool movie, and I'm sure we're going to get around to it one of these days. Screenwriter David Koepp had fond memories of listening to reruns of the Shadow radio serials as a kid, and in 1990 was able to produce a script that the studios liked. Both he and Bregman had particular nostalgic attachments to the serial, including a lingering resonance from those memories they clearly wanted their own project to embody. And Koepp consulted the pulp novels to engineer his narrative, and he borrowed the tone from the radio show.
All right, let me translate this.
Yes.
David Koepp wanted his own Batman. Basically. He saw what Sam Hamm did with Batman, and he wanted one of those. It's very similar to what Jeffrey Boehm would do with the Phantom. He wanted his own Batman, so he wrote that.
I mean, and this is like the David Koepp. Like if you're a screenwriter, or your screenwriters, like you've heard his name. We're going to talk about him later, but he wrote the script with Alec Baldwin in mind, as he was a fan of the actor.
Really?
That's what he says. Because he said he had the eyes and the voice, and he had so much of what I pictured Cranston being. And pause a second. Like, if you look at Alec Baldwin's filmography up to this point, like around 1990,
Beetlejuice, The Hunt for Red October.
Glengarry Glen Ross, he's in it for a few minutes.
Coffees for Closers.
Yeah, Coffees for Closers, which also had Al Pacino in it. But he, like, I mean, and this is kind of rare for screenwriters. Like, they normally don't get to do this, but he sat in on the rehearsal process and incorporated much of Baldwin's humor into the script before principal photography began, which is apparent, because I think maybe some of these moments, especially in the dialogue, you make a comment later in the notes that it feels like a new writer took over.
Yeah.
And I think that this might be part of it, like where I want to make this character more like Alec Baldwin. And so I'm going to pepper in some of this stuff. So
it only fits so much.
Yeah. I mean, I know he was known for being in lots of crime dramas and things like that, but also he was hosting Saturday Night Live quite a bit even then, wasn't he?
Oh yeah. He was, by this point, he had hosted it like 3 or 4 times by this point.
Yeah.
And in 94, I think to promote this movie, he came on, I think, with Kim Basinger.
Oh.
Like, I think it was around this time that he hosted it with her. And that was, I think, the one where he had the ill-fated Canteen Boy sketch with Adam Sandler, where it had some very pedophilic sort of undertones to it.
Oh, I don't remember that. I'll have to look that up.
It's the one where he plays the Scoutmaster.
Yeah. Okay. This is ringing a bell here. Okay.
It's something.
So Stephen H. Burham served as DP on this movie, and he's worked with Mulcahy quite a few times, but some of his better-known works can be seen in The Untouchables, Carlito's Way, Raising Cain, Mission Impossible 96.
Those are all Brian De Palma movies.
Yeah, and Mystery Men. Which
is not a Brian De Palma movie. It's honestly kind of similar to this movie, but at least that one embraces its goofiness.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking too. Yeah, but
Casanova Frankenstein would not be like a stranger to this world, I think.
No. It was just funny, like whenever I was looking up this guy's filmography, the first one that came up was The Untouchables, and I just thought, what? Like, this is the same guy. But yeah, we'll talk more about like the cinematography and production design and stuff like that later. So this movie was shot in 65 days, nearly all of it on the Universal backlot in Hollywood. An earthquake destroyed their Hall of Mirrors set for the ending, so they lost a week. They had to improvise a little bit. And that's one reason why the scene feels a bit weak and perhaps rushed.
Okay, all right.
And I think this is probably the big earthquake that was in LA that is featured in Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I could be mistaken.
Well, I mean, the big like California earthquake that I'm familiar with is the one in 1990 that like interrupted a World Series game in San Francisco.
So The Shadow was meant to be a summer blockbuster and the starting point for a new film franchise with toy, game, and clothing lines. And the toy line was pretty expansive. I mean, like I said, I had quite a few of those, but there was also a video game version of The Shadow for the Super NES that was developed to tie in with the film, but they didn't release it despite being finished because it just didn't do well at the box office. And so for its theatrical run, competition was pretty fierce when it came out. This was July. It came out July 1st, 94. It was up against The Lion King, then True Lies, and then The Mask, just for July. It opened at number 2, but it just quickly lost momentum. It only made $32 million in its domestic run. I guess it's $40 million budget, but they eventually recouped their losses in foreign sales. But needless to say, the planned franchise was abandoned.
It's very interesting that this contended with The Mask at the box office, because The Mask is also similarly a sort of like darkened superhero kind of tale. But the difference, I think the big difference is that The Mask is stylized towards a different kind of nostalgia. Like The Shadow is very much like 30s and 40s nostalgia. The Mask, I think, even goes towards like the 20s. Like the whole big part of The Mask was the sort of like neo swing revival of the mid 90s, like Cherry Poppin' Daddies and
the Zoot Suits and all that stuff.
Exactly, Zoot Suit Riot. And that at least was so wild and so out there that yes, the neo swing movement was actually jump started by The Mask and had a bit of a heyday in the mid 90s with bands like Cherry Poppin' Daddies and also Squirrel Nut Zippers and lots of weird named groups. But The Shadow couldn't really jumpstart anything. they were trying to be old and new at the same time, and it was confusing because they couldn't really put a handle on when this was. Like as I was watching, it's okay, is this supposed to be the 40s? Is this supposed to be now?
Yeah, I mean, there is that little title card, I think. Or no, wait, there is, but it's just New York City. I don't know if it has a date, 7 years later or something.
I'm thinking like the 40s, but it doesn't exactly say.
Yeah, because I think that there's some time frame here that is specified somewhere.
Or else it's like Watchmen, and it's like a time period where the president is still Calvin Coolidge, like 80 years later.
Oh, right, yeah.
And it's like, I don't know what I'm still doing here, but pay your taxes.
Now, Roger Ebert, to me, this was surprising, gave it 3 out of 4 stars. He says, if you respond to film noir, if you like dark streets and women with scarlet lips and big fast cars with running boards, the look of this movie will work some kind of magic.
Gene Siskel must have strangled him for that. I don't get it. I can't do a Siskel. But.
He didn't like it.
No, of course he didn't like it because he was always the sensible one of it. But but it's funny because Ebert did also like Joe versus the Volcano, which was which is on our Patreon feed. If you guys haven't heard that one, it's a really good one.
It is a really good one, and it's our open house episode, so anybody can go check that out. It's unlocked. So head over to patreon.com/VericonVideo. So in October 2007, Sam Raimi and his producing partner, Josh Donen, acquired the rights to The Shadow and began working on a script. 5 years later, Raimi was asked to comment on the status of the project, and he said that they just couldn't make the script work for what they had in mind. And so that
makes two times that Sam Raimi has failed to make a Shadow movie.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, he made Oz the Great and Powerful. That happened, and he couldn't make a Shadow movie.
I don't know, maybe those rights are still tied up or something. But in 2021, actually just a week ago at the time of this recording, the first in a new book series written by...
Yeah, you like what I put here?
I love it. In brackets, James Patterson and, in bracket, Brian Sitz.
Don't even pretend that it's James Patterson he has a ghostwriter for all his books. Like it's a known fact by this point. Right. There's a reason he has like 20 books per year. He gets other people to do it, then he spruces them up and Pattersons him up and releases them under his name because that's what you can do when you're a big author. Stephen King doesn't do that shit.
No. But this hits store shelves, and it reimagines the character and sets Cranston in this dystopian future, from what I understand. And early reviews have not been that favorable.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows. Armed with quick-draw 45s, the mysterious crime fighter faces the evil Shawan Khan, now ready for battle. But Shadow's hypno-eyes cloud men's minds.
You will obey. I will obey.
But Khan escapes on his serpent bike.
After him, Shadow.
Khan fires first. Shadow cycle pops a wheelie, launching a counter-missile. Each sold separately.
Into the room, Khan.
Or is it? Who knows? The Shadow knows.
All right. So let's get into some of our discussion points here.
Yes.
Let's start with The Shadow is a 90s, what the fuck, superhero movie.
Yes, this is a genre in itself, a subgenre. This is something that I noticed just from because I talked about this and The Phantom earlier, that there were a lot of very similar what the hell kind of superhero movies that sort of failed as superhero movies. And no decade did this quite like the 1990s. And off the top of my head, you have movies like Tank Girl, like Spawn, The Phantom. I would throw Steel in here maybe. Blade is one of the better ones, but it's still very what the fuck. This, and even kind of The Rocketeer, which definitely has some what the fuck elements to it. Especially a henchman that looks a lot like, the Shadow in this movie. Complete with the nose.
Interesting. Gosh, I haven't seen that since it came out.
I will vouch for that movie even in the darkest of moments. I like that movie a lot.
Okay.
It's got Terry O'Quinn as Howard Hughes is probably the best screen Howard Hughes that we've gotten. Timothy Dalton's an amazing villain. Alan Arkin is an amazing Alan Arkin. There's some really good shit in that movie. And it's Joe Johnston's probably finest hour.
Okay. Yeah, I'm down to revisit that at some point.
And it does fit into this because it's also very reminiscent of a lot of the serials. But
yeah, it's an original story, right?
Yeah, but it's definitely rooted in a lot of those heroes.
Yeah, very much like Sky Captain, right? Or very similar.
Yes, yeah, but better. But this sort of subgenre, because this was a formative period of the superhero genre with movies like the Burton Batmans coming out, and even the Schumacher Batmans. Like, many filmmakers decided to go big and wild, much like the Source comics and such, and eschewed realism entirely. Tank Girl was the biggest example of one of these for me until now. Because I'm a fucking weirdo, I actually kind of have a soft spot for Tank Girl. I think it succeeds by failing, really. Mm-hmm. It tries to alienate as many people as possible so that the right people will like it. And it sort of succeeds for me by appealing to my demented sensibilities in there. I can say with confidence that it's not the greatest movie, but it's still wild enough to really like me. But The Shadow is even more of a what the fuck superhero movie than Tank Girl, honestly.
You know, I've never seen Tank Girl.
It's definitely a precursor to something like Birds of Prey, the Harley Quinn movie.
Okay.
And also being, it's a female superhero movie directed by a lady director. So,
that's right.
And
the lead actress,
Rachel Talalay.
What's her? Oh, Rachel Talalay.
Lori Petty is in it. Rachel Talalay was the director.
Was the director? Yeah. Rachel Talalay. Well, she directed Freddy's Dead, the Final Nightmare.
Okay.
But she came up like working on the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and starting with the first one, I think she was an accountant or something.
Oh, sweet.
So that's how I recognize her name. But what's her name? Okay. Laura Petty?
Lori Petty, yeah, that's the star of it.
She was on Orange is the New Black.
Yeah, she was also in a League of Their Own and Free Willy, and she's gotten some character actor stuff.
Yeah, and I like her a lot.
But getting back to The Shadow, which sort of eclipses Tank Girl as the sort of what the hell is going on kind of movie. There's a lot of moments in this movie where I was like, okay, what the hell is this trying to be? What is going on? And one of the things about it is that, and I'll get into this more when I talk about Russell Mulcahy as a director, but a lot of this movie is very much shot like a Tim Burton Batman film. Mm-hmm. The tone and the bizarreness of the concept skew it even further than Burton or even Schumacher.
Yeah. So something about the tone, like I want to come back to that in just a second.
Yeah. Okay. So the first real inkling of what the hell was going on, other than being thrust into the movie and seeing Alec Baldwin as this sort of weird warlord in the middle of Tibet kind of deal, but the entire sequence in Tulku's palace, complete with the flying knife that bites Alec Baldwin on the hand, eschews even mysteriousness just to be bonkers. This is the first 7 minutes of the movie. Yeah. You're trying to figure out what is going on, and it's just dazzling you and wowing you. I even got a slight Mortal Kombat feel to even the CGI behind the knife.
Yeah, no, I did too. I thought the same thing. And real quickly before I forget, because I forgot earlier, United Cutlery was a company that made, or they licensed different like movie knives and stuff, swords. And one of the things that they were selling when this movie came out was the Purba dagger, the Tibetan tri-blade dagger. And it had like the sleeping face on one side and like the angry gnashing of teeth face on the other.
That's going to be cool.
Yeah, and it was really cool. And I wanted that so bad. You can still find that on eBay for, $100, something like that. But I wanted that so bad as a kid. But it's actually based on like a real kind of dagger. Like the Purba dagger is, I think, like a traditional like Tibetan knife.
Okay.
But anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there.
No, that's an important detail because that's got to be cool in person. But one of the things that threw me with The Shadow was just how the movie balanced humor and dark seriousness without much of a control on either. Mm-hmm. Like the sailor falling from the Empire statement leading right to the line, it's all falling into place for me now.
That's an interesting shot because it transitions from, like, you see Patrick Fischler falling in the background, and then in the foreground we see Lamont Cranston and Margot, and they're talking to each other and they're on their way. It's just it's
a little silly.
It's a little silly, but
you're trying to be serious and then you just end up being silly, and then you're silly while because that's the point where Khan is sort of singing Lullaby of Broadway as he tempts the guy to jump off the bridge. You can't be both at the same time.
I want to ask this. So is it reductive to say that the film is tonally inconsistent or uneven?
It would be like this. I think you have to pick a tone and stick with it. I understand stylistically, maybe they made a choice to make it this uneven, but if that's the choice you're making, you're going to alienate the people that want you to be one or the other, like me. Mm-hmm. So
it's something worth puzzling over, because I think this is a criticism that's very easy to use and get away with without really explaining like what it is that you're getting at. So I would say, like, is tonal inconsistency a bad thing? And how do we determine what makes it consistent and consistent with what?
Interesting.
And so because everybody's a critic now, everybody's an expert on social media. And I feel like there's just a lot of overused phrases like that don't really capture, or they're not really precise in what they're trying to critique. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Look, I still have problems with movies that will do that because, it's hard to really make doing multiple tones and having them all balanced together work. Mm-hmm. It's hard for movies to do that. I mean, the best of them can be something like The Princess Bride, which can be funny and also serious and also all of these things, but still feel balanced. This doesn't feel balanced.
I think that's a good way of putting it. Like a movie can ebb and flow and be satisfying or not be jarring. But yeah, I think there should be some degree of balance in, or else I feel like you run the risk of the audience not knowing how to feel or not knowing like what to think about a certain thing or how to interpret, the piece that you're presenting to them. And so I think maybe that's part of the issue as well is in terms of like tonal issues is on the filmmaker's side. Like, okay, well, how, what is it that you're wanting your audience to think, feel, or do? How are you appealing to your audience? And so I don't know, just some food for thought. And so I asked this, or I posed this question because I'm reminded of our conversation last time about Susan Sontag's notes on camp with regard to Flash Gordon. And I see this as what she calls naive camp, in that it does, for the most part, try to be taken seriously. Mm-hmm. And from the resources that I've culled for this episode, watching interviews and stuff, and even my own response as a viewer, very little about this movie indicates that it's being intentionally campy.
With the exception of maybe Tim Curry, pretty much everybody in this is sort of taking it very seriously at face value. Actually, no, I would throw John Lone into that category as well because he vamps a little bit. Mm-hmm. But he does so to make, the most intimidating and, professional sort of villain in this. I mean, yes, he does go big and bad, but that's sort of what this character needs to be. Yeah. So it's a mix of camp and also credibility.
I think it's definitely campy. And I want to make sure, too, we draw a distinction between camp and wit. There is humor peppered throughout, but, for color, for levity, and it's somewhat off at times in the sense that the humor, when present, it's campy because it's operating with a predominantly serious plot. So there's a man fighting crime to atone for his sins and stop a villain from decimating New York City. I mean, if a thing is camp, according to Sontag, it embraces this exaggerated aesthetic and a style while being anti-serious, presenting that comic vision of the world. And so if we check the shadow against that, sure, it can be called camp, but I'd argue that as a whole, it's not deliberate camp.
No, I don't think it's complete. I don't think it's anywhere near as campy as Flash Gordon. I think it's just sort of botched stylization. I think it's very silly in that it's trying to be silly, but it's also trying to be serious, and just the dissonance sometimes traps it.
I like that. I like how you put that. There is dissonance there, right?
Yes, lots of it.
So I think that's something that I know we were talking about performances, like in Flash Gordon, and the only phrase I could come up with is that when you have good performers and bad performers working together, is that there's a lack of harmony.
Yes.
And how they work together. And so I think that there's a very similar dynamic going on here where, as you said, there's dissonance between maybe intention and what the thing turned out to be, what it is as a thing in itself.
Right.
It's kind of more philosophical and metaphysical than I intended for it to be. But, I think you get the point.
So also adding to the sort of tonal whiplash that this movie can sort of give is a very unfittingly macabre scene, which is this dream sequence that Cranston has. I mean, yes, it is an extremely what the fuck moment that comes out of nowhere and feels befitting of a genre that this isn't. And then how that's addressed by the movie in the very next scene is through comedy, where Baldwin says, I dreamed I tore all the skin off my face and was someone else underneath. You have problems. I'm aware of that. It's almost, again, this is the point where I'm like, another writer took over. Because it was trying to balance levity with very scary and dark imagery. The sort of feeling that when Cranston closes his eyes that he can take his face off and really be Khan, which is a theme I will get back to a little later, actually.
Yeah. I want to address that too later because I think the idea behind it is very cool. And I think, when you were watching this, I told you to look out for the poltergeist scene, which is what this always reminds me of, minus the gore. And it's also like the contrast there between like in that exchange with Margot where he tells her or she tells him of her dream and about the beach and her toes in the sand and all that sensual bliss. And it's like, oh, what did you dream about? And that's when he said, oh, I dreamed of throwing all the skin off my face. And was it someone else underneath? It just lands in a very awkward way, I think.
Yeah. Both sides of the scene are tugging at each other. Penelope Ann Miller has this very sexy moment here that she makes work. And then we also have to be yanked back to the sort of, oh, yeah, this is what's happening. And it's both elicits fear, but it's also funny.
I think the thing that I can't quite wrap my head around is, one, the character of Lamont Cranston is puzzling in that he starts out as such a bad guy and he's on this path of atonement where he is like wrestling with who he is or like what his, like, is he good? Like, is he really good? Is he doing good? Or is this just like part of his penance, I guess? Like, I guess like the way that they're exploring his inner conflict, like, I can see what they're going for, but it feels very ill-fitting or something.
And there's not really a payoff to the sort of fear of what if I take off my face and it's really him the whole time.
Right.
But a point I make later in this does sort of reference what could have been that payoff.
Okay. All right.
But we'll get to that in a little bit.
Okay.
And one of the things that we discussed that I was immediately taken off guard by was the fact that Baldwin, when he becomes the Shadow, he shifts his face into an unrecognizable form, which might even be scary to some people. Why must our hero look like this with hooded eyes and a lengthened nose? It's sort of Darkman-esque, but less practical, literally and figuratively.
This morning, I heard possibly the best justification for this choice is that his appearance is a psychic projection to render him unrecognizable. So his features are perhaps intentionally exaggerated for that reason. But I mean, really, it's more likely a reason to make Baldwin appear more like the character in the pulp novels.
So let's unwrap that for a moment. The vision that Baldwin uses that Lamont Cranston uses to strike fear into the hearts of men is making them all think that he really looks like he has a big nose and hooded eyes. Does that correspond with a stereotype that may have been taboo in the 1940s?
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
We can sing this movie's praises for not really being like anti-Asian, but how are we to think of a movie that has like the scary image of someone with a very Jewish kind of nose striking fear into the hearts of villains? Mm-hmm. Maybe does that draw into their own fears? It's something that they unwrap only slightly that they should have really thought about.
That's a really interesting observation because that's a facet that I feel like should be unpacked a little bit because especially lately, we have been very interested in looking at representation in a lot of these movies and like at the time in which they came out, but also kind of looking back from 2021, like what else can we see now or how does it look differently? And so, no, I think you make a good point that it's
potential to be slightly anti-Semitic, but you know,
yeah, it could be. It very well could be. I mean, that's one way of reading it.
Yeah,
you know, one of many.
The fact that we can have a lot of ways of reading a movie like The Shadow, it speaks more to the fact that there's more to talk about than just it's bad. So
right, exactly.
We're getting stuff out of it.
Well, you are.
And then there's the big idea in terms of the what the fuck nature of this movie, of the inclusion of the concept of Genghis Khan's descendant wreaking nuclear havoc on New York City. It's a very archaic 1940s era idea, especially in its lack of true realism, but also it's a sort of very 1940s fear. Someone with a nuclear weapon who is of Asian descent and basically is connected to the historical horrors committed by, people of Asian descent, but with the nuclear weapon is connected to the then present horrors of people of Asian descent, the nuclear bomb and Japan. So it's exaggerated from a 1940s perspective, but it's also in the 90s, without that context, it's even more exaggerated. It's the last known descendant of Genghis Khan wants to take over New York. Sure, fine.
I'm looking for something here. There is a famous, I guess infamous, cover of Time magazine that was commenting on Asian Americans. Yeah, here it is. This issue of Time magazine. This is August 31st, 1987. The cover is talking about those Asian American whiz kids. But this is in regards to education. But I think that in the late 80s, early 90s, the whole, I don't want to say anti-Asian American, but I think the cultural anxieties about Asian Americans, it was still very present, in American society. The article mentions an updated yellow peril fear.
Yeah.
In that Asian Americans had an advantage in the U.S. education system because they were able to excel intellectually. So I think even at this time, like in the early 90s, that people would have still been able to read some degree of yellow peril xenophobia in pop culture at the time. But on Shawan Khan, like he's sure able to navigate the modern world pretty easily once he's out of his silver coffin. I mean, he's very taken with modern style and amenities and bombs.
Yeah, no, it's very quick of him to sort of adapt to that. Only for the purposes of making him an intimidating villain. It'd come a lot slower. A lot of the time, it took Elizabeth Banks's Rita Repulsa a while to really adjust to the wonders of modern day Krispy Kreme and.
I haven't seen that one.
Oh, well, it's something. I saw that with Lewis back in the day and Jack.
Mm.
And also what caught me off guard, the very Twin Peaksy tone when Margot enters Cranston's mind.
Yeah, I wonder if this is where we get a bit of Mulcahy's music video background coming into play.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we're bearing the lead here. Russell Mulcahy before he became. We're going to talk this later when we get into Mulcahy as a director. But he was an Australian music video director. He directed a lot of Elton John videos and INXS videos and AC/DC videos. And, he would have some very dramatic moments in those because that's the kind of director he is. And so that was one of his few moments in this to really channel that, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, he directed videos for Culture Club, Duran Duran, even the video Killed the Radio Star, like the first video that played on MTV.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, we'll talk more about him in a second.
Yeah, no, because he's an interesting case.
Yeah.
I literally wrote into my notes here, because I do these progressively as I watch. I literally wrote in my notes, an invisible hotel / lair? Why you? I didn't even just channel out any of my my emotions. I was just like, oh, come on.
Well, okay, this has frustrated me for many years. The premise of the Shadow is built around his superpower, I guess, is that he has the ability to cloud men's minds or people's minds so that they can't see him. It doesn't make him invisible. Here, they're trying to say that everyone's minds have been clouded so that when they see this space, that it's just an empty lot and not a hotel / lair. But there are several scenes where we see the Shadow, and sometimes he is a literal shadow, and sometimes he is the Invisible Man.
Yeah, and sometimes he appears for the purpose of the audience.
Exactly.
Or just like Baldwin, like, oh yeah, sure, I'm here.
Right, and so I get that they're trying to find things to do with him visually, but like there's the scene where like it's just the audience in the Shadow, and he's invisible, or whenever he's battling Claymore.
Well, we'll get to that.
Yeah. You can see him like in the water, and it's like something out of Hollow Man or something.
Back to Verhoeven.
Yeah. So yeah, there's some little things like that like, okay, sure, movie, whatever.
Yeah, whatever, fine. And then the bouncing, rolling bomb chase down the stairs, it's practically a slapstick sequence. And that's being intercut with like actual like menacing things going on between the Shadow and Khan. But you just have this rolling bomb and then all these characters running after it. And like, what are we supposed to latch on to?
It made me think of Batman, the movie.
What is there to do with a bomb? Yes.
And also the bomb in Batman Forever, because it's also a giant spherical bomb with the ticking clock on the side.
Honestly, that's also kind of the bomb in Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, it is. Because
it's just a random bomb that's going to go off, and Batman has to get it out over the bay, which is still a little bit silly. Mm-hmm. Something with spherical bombs and movies like this.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on and talk a little bit more about The Shadow as a serial adaptation. I'm going to just kind of hit the highlights here, but The Shadow debuted July 31st, 1930 as the mysterious narrator of the radio program Detective Story Hour, which was developed to boost sales of Street and Smith's monthly pulp detective story magazine. When listeners of the program began asking at newsstands for copies of That Shadow Detective magazine, Street and Smith launched a magazine based on the character and hired Walter B. Gibson to create a concept to fit the name and voice and to write a story featuring him. The first issue of the pulp series, The Shadow magazine, went on sale April 1st, 1931. And on September 26, 1937, The Shadow, a new radio drama based on the character, as created by Gibson for the Pulp magazine, premiered with the story The Death House Rescue, in which the Shadow is characterized as having the hypnotic power to cloud men's minds so they cannot see him. And so in the magazine stories, the Shadow didn't literally become invisible.
There was an invisible man by that point. They didn't want to rip him off.
Good point.
They had the Claude Rains movie, which is pretty good.
I like that one. We get this line in the movie, of course, a lot, but it's an introductory line from the radio adaptation. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The Shadow knows. And this is spoken by actor Frank Riddick, and it's famous. You know, it has been parodied a bunch since probably the 40s.
I just want to make it clear, the phrase "the Shadow knows" is spelled Knows, not Nose. But to me, it should be the Nose.
For you listeners out there, like when I first read Jordan's Letterboxd review of this, like the subtitle was "The Shadow Knows," Nose. And I just fell out off the couch. It was so funny.
That's just what I kept thinking. Because he literally, there's a part in the movie where Alec Baldwin in full Shadow regalia says, "The Shadow knows." I'm like, yes, I know, but what about what? Oh, okay.
Oh, right. A 22-year-old Orson Welles lent his voice to the role for a short time. But there were different iterations of the radio drama that ran through the 50s. And the character evolved a little bit from the pulp to the radio show. So some elements for this film were borrowed just from the radio show, like his becoming invisible, the addition of Margot Lane as a love interest, and Lamont Cranston as the Shadow. Now, it gets a little complicated here, but I'll try to simplify. So originally in the pulps, the character's name was Kent Allard. He was a World War I fighter pilot nicknamed the Black Eagle. And this carries over somewhat in this movie because Black Eagle translates to Yinko in Mandarin, which is how Khan knows him in this film.
But a white guy being nicknamed the Black Eagle, that's that's something.
Anyway, in the pulps, Cranston is a separate character. He's this rich playboy who travels the world while the Shadow uses his identity and resources in New York. It just gets complicated. So anyway, they streamlined this for the radio show. And from the pulps, we get his costume, his twin pistols, which I love that cross-draw rig, by the way.
Yeah.
And and his network of agents.
Yeah. This is something that I was originally going to mention later, but I'll bring it in here. The whole thing about having a network of agents that also sort of crosses through metatext and becomes like, you know, people like in real life being like, do you want to be an agent of the Shadow? Like, you know, win a ring or whatever. That's a concept that's been carried over ever since like Arthur Conan Doyle had like the little Baker Street network of people in real life who were like fans. That was like a fan club kind of thing. And that would be replicated in contemporary films like Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai, Across the Eighth Dimension, and Galaxy Quest.
And there's another Galaxy Quest connection that we're going to make later.
There's a surprising amount of Galaxy Quest connections.
There are.
Which I'm not complaining. Galaxy Quest is great.
No, it's great. Yeah. And then like a few narrative elements from the pulps were borrowed for the film, including Shawan Khan, who appeared in 4 novels. The Silver Coffin of Temujin was from The Masters of Death. And the bit with Khan commanding through the cigarette billboard, that comes from The Golden Master.
Cool.
And the scene when the Shadow saves Roy Tam on the bridge, that's loosely based on the opening of The Living Shadow, which was the first novel.
Oh, cool.
So I'm at least glad that David Koepp went back to the source material and at least tried to pull out some things that were part of the DNA of this character.
Right.
There was a comic strip with plot lines adapted from the pulp novels that ran from 1940 to 1942. And as we said, Bob Kane has cited the Shadow as a major influence behind Batman, and we'll see some other characteristics that were borrowed from the next serial we'll talk about.
Getting into the little things this movie does as an adaptation. A lot of the colloquialisms and dialogue. We talked about the who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men thing. But just little lines like, as inevitable as your guilty conscience, and just little lines here and there feel like they come right out of the serials. You can tell David Koepp tried to really replicate a lot of the patter and frothy sort of dialogue of the originals.
Yeah, like early on we get this line, the weed of crime bears bitter fruit, and that's from the scene on the bridge. It's taken directly from the conclusion of episodes of the radio show. So at the end of every episode, after the announcer has given the credits, the Shadow would say, the weed of crime bears bitter fruit, crime does not pay. The Shadow knows. And
yes,
so
he does.
He does.
He tends to. He knows a lot about crime and weed. That would explain a lot.
It's like there's that line whenever Cranston goes to visit Dr. Roy Tam, but he's posing as an agent of the Shadow.
Yeah.
To get a metal analysis on this coin that he got from Khan. Anyway, the short version is, this metal can be used to build a bomb. Dr. Tam's like, yeah, and it would be this destructive, yada, yada, yada. He calls it something, and then Cranston's like, oh, or an atomic bomb. He's like, yeah, that's catchy.
Okay.
It's like, yeah, the Shadow knows. That's what he should have said. The Shadow knows.
The Shadow knows that actually works.
Yeah, that's what it's going to be called.
Yeah. And then Cranston seeing danger through the fireplace feels like a very serial era idea, or at least something so ridiculous it should have come from an early era.
This feels also very 90s, not just in execution either, but I feel like we saw a lot of similar premonition-like imagery at that time in movies.
Sort of. I mean, they could definitely go as broad as that.
Yeah, and especially like as people started to play a little bit more with CGI and test the boundaries of that. We got pretty rough CGI in here. Yeah.
And then the scene where Cranston escapes from the flooding spear container is very comic-like in nature. It reminds me of the Spider-Man sequence where he's under a building that's sort of caved in and he's got to lift himself up, which was replicated in Spider-Man Homecoming for the most part.
Oh, yeah.
It's something that's like, okay, our hero has to get out of this somehow using only his wit and his will. And that sequence did remind me of that.
That's one of the more memorable scenes for me as a kid. And I don't know why. This is also the where Cranston is using like bullet holes in the structure to breathe, right?
And there's a moment where he puts his finger through to make sure that it can, that it goes to the outside, and then he just puts his lips to it and starts sucking. The second I saw this, I had to stop, look at it for about 10 seconds and go, what else am I supposed to think about here? I used that. I shot a picture and I sent it to you, Brandon, and I went, this your first time at a glory hole, Mr. Baldwin?
I laughed so hard. God. I was hysterical.
I'd never thought I'd see anything like that in a movie. I mean, yes, we'll talk about the queer theming, but this was just like, how could you not see the connotation here? It's an underwater glory hole.
And I was really shocked to see that there was no mention of that in your notes for the next section.
There wasn't?
No, not that I remember.
Well, I think it was more, I don't think Mulcahy really meant to be like, okay, I'm going to simulate a glory hole here. They're going to really like me back there. But I just thought it was odd as all,
Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting.
It was. Yeah, your caption was on point, let me tell you.
I literally sent that to as many people as I could and going, what do you see here? Because I don't want to think that my mind went completely to the gutter.
Oh, yeah. No, I sent it to everybody, too. Yeah.
And all my friends saw exactly what I saw. What the fuck?
And also, we should mention, before we move on, like the whole thing about this bomb is built around this beryllium sphere.
Beryllium sphere.
Yeah. Yes. Or as Tim Curry calls it, beryllium sphere. Yeah. Because he's trying to do this very strange American accent we're going to talk about later.
Yeah.
But hey, NSEA protector power source, anyone?
Well, screw that. Another Galaxy Quest reference.
Yeah.
And we'll get to how that line was neutered whenever if we ever cover Galaxy Quest, which I think you want to do.
Yes, I do want to do Galaxy Quest.
So I think we might have to one of these days because I fucking love it. So let's talk about Russell Mulcahy.
Let's do it.
As a director, as unwittingly or wittingly a queer artist, because as I talked about last episode, the 90s and even the 80s had this sort of big three of blockbuster directors that also just so happened to be either openly or eventually openly gay. Mm-hmm. And it was Joel Schumacher, Roland Emmerich, and Russell Mulcahy. And Mulcahy is the one that I think people don't talk about as much as Schumacher and Emmerich, because those two have made bigger and worse movies.
Right.
Like, anybody talking about 90s cinema, they can talk about Independence Day, and they can talk about Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, or even The Lost Boys and Day After Tomorrow or whatever. But Mulcahy is mostly just known as, he's the guy that directed Highlander. And he is, to an extent. He had a bit of a career. First of all, he's an Australian director.
I think it's an early 80s movie called Razorback That's
yes,
that people have been talking about quite recently. I think Sketches actually covered that with Pete on Pete's show.
Interesting.
A Dingo Ate My Movie, which if you haven't listened to, you should go check that out.
Razorback was his first breakthrough movie. It was an Australian movie that garnered him attention over here, and after then he did, Highland, because as we discussed, he was doing music videos. Mm-hmm. He was basically one of the main music video guys for people like Elton John, and he did a lot of queer artists like Falco. I would throw in here, and Go West, and Duran Duran. But also, he starts directing more. First of all, he basically ghost directs Rambo 3. He takes over for Peter McDonald as he, in the middle of production. He ghost directs the rest of that movie. And that's basically what gets him on the radar. And after, the failure of Highlander 2, he does movies like Ricochet and Blue Ice and The Real McCoy, movies that most people haven't really heard of, and Silent Trigger. And after this and Silent Trigger, he sort of stops being really well known in a lot of blockbustery kind of circles. Mm-hmm. And he starts doing a lot more like TV movies and TV directing, which he's been doing on and off for the past like 10 or 15 years because his last real like high profile movie he did was Resident Evil 3 Extinction. Mm-hmm. And since then he's been doing a lot of 13 Reasons Why and Teen Wolf and things like that.
Yeah, I saw that he'd kind of ventured more into television.
Yeah, and that's fine. But yeah, Mulcahy is openly gay, as evidenced by the number of Elton John videos he's done. And
Queen, right?
And Queen. I mean, he did the Queen videos, I think, that were connected to Highlander.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because the Queen put out the soundtrack album instead of just making Highlander the soundtrack. They put out their album A Kind of Magic, which was all the music from Highlander, and it's a good album. It's definitely a moneymaker. There's some good stuff on there. One Vision is on there, and Mulcahy directed the music videos for that, or at least the ones that had to do with Highlander, because it probably had clips from the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, he's openly gay, and I think it was the shot of a shirtless, hairy Alec Baldwin springing up in a darkly lit bed that clued me into the fact that, first of all, this was directed by the same person who gave us Highlander, and two, this was directed by a gay man.
And I want to know what was with parading around shirtless Alec Baldwin in the early 90s. Like the cover of Miami Blues spotlights his chest hair. I mean, maybe that was the nail in the silver coffin. Like from then on, all good-looking leading men had to be waxed and as smooth as a river pebble. But back then, got to have the full rug on the front.
Jesus. I mean, even the much maligned SNL sketch we were talking about earlier has a reference to his chest hair.
Of course.
So, okay, Alec, sure. As the director of this, Russell Mulcahy, what I found was very interesting is that there weren't a lot of shots other than those sort of opening ones and other than the music video shot later there where I could really say, oh, this is the director of Highlander. No. For the most of this movie, Russell Mulcahy is really channeling Tim Burton because he is trying to make this movie almost exactly like Burton's Batman films. He is trying to completely emulate that, and for the most part, he does succeed. But there's a lot of great pans, a lot of dynamic wide shots. He's trying definitely to be Burton, and ironically, he's a bit more foreshadowing of the next guy that would take over the Batman franchise, Joel Schumacher.
Out of the other stuff that his DP Burham has done, I mean, the only other one that seemed similar might be Mystery Men.
Yes.
But I'm just looking, this is a Universal film. And so, I mean, Warner Brothers, they had Batman. That was going to be, or at the time like that, I think they knew that was going to be their cash cow, to borrow a phrase from Congo. And so I'm trying to think what Universal had at the time. But again, they were wanting this to be the next big franchise.
Yeah.
And, sadly, things just didn't pan out for them. But they definitely had high hopes. And I think they were really I'm trying to think, just a few years ago, whenever, all right, I'll give you a good example. Whenever Marvel started to really take off and DC was like, okay, well, we're going to try to do what they're doing. We're going to try to appropriate their formula and try to make it our own. You could tell very early on in some of those earlier DC movies, it just wasn't working the same way.
No, because they were trying to rush it.
Right. And so
it's what Universal, ironically, would do with their Dark Universe that only had one movie in it.
Yeah. So I think that a lot of studios, they try to test the waters here and see, they look at what someone else has done, kind of build a playbook and was like, okay, well, let's just do that and see if that works for us. And oftentimes it doesn't work the same way. And so I think this might be one of those cases where they were trying to ride the coattails of Batman and give audiences something similar, but ultimately didn't live up to either their vision or what audiences really were gravitating towards at the time.
Yeah. One of the really cool Burton-y kind of moments in this is the transfer of information sequence, where a message is handed down from person to person, goes through tubes, and it's probably some of the most inspired work of the film because you follow all these tubes throughout town, the carrying messages, spindling through all of these different outside areas, and it's very cool and very stylized. Definitely a nice sight.
I remember really liking that as a kid, and I wish we got more of that since the movie takes a good bit of time to explain the network of agents in service of the Shadow.
Yeah, I was expecting Sab Shimano to pop up again later. I thought there was, because you set him up early, he helps out in the middle. I was expecting him to pop up near the end and help him out with something.
Yeah, we get the whole like invisible ink letter writing thing to get a message to Mo, but I want to talk about that a little bit more as we get closer towards the end. So
this is something that kind of struck me because I was trying to look for queer undertones in this movie. There weren't a lot because this is a very heterosexual movie. Mm-hmm. I think he knew it needed to be heterosexual, but the one inkling and the closest I think we got to the undertones, would Claymore's devotion to Khan be slightly queer?
Well, I don't know, could you maybe point to some specifics?
Okay. Claymore is the only person in the film who isn't really enchanted or hypnotized by Khan in order to sort of help him and help him get what he wants. He does it on his own accord.
Right.
It's not stated as to whether or not it's from a standpoint of evilness or not, because he does, he does have some evil undertones in hitting on Margot a little bit.
Right.
But you see how pleased he is with the scenes where he is with Khan, or what he does in order to keep things going, or like how he sort of is a little horrified to take on the Shadow himself, but he does it on Khan's orders. So do you think that thevotion is slightly queer, or do you think it's just, or am I reading too much into it?
I'm not really sure. That's not the way I read it. I read it as more as there's some maybe unspoken incentive for him to be in service of Khan, and I don't know. It could be something you mentioned earlier about maybe like Ghostbusters 2, like with Janosch and Vigo, where I'll help you out, but I get the girl. You know what I mean? Like that whole kind of dynamic. Like, I'll help you out and I'll be your servant, but I want something and I want that girl. I feel like that might have been part of that, but again, it's not really clear from what they give us.
I don't know. Maybe I was confused because, I've already seen a movie where Tim Curry openly lusts over a big, strong guy who was recently mummified. I thought I would be leaving the Rocky Horror connections in Flash Gordon.
Hey, everything's carrying over, man.
It's
hard not to. We got Tim Curry here.
You got Tim Curry here. I kind of have to resort to that. Okay, so something about both of the Claymore versus Shadow sequences seem very much in Mulcahy's wheelhouse as far as fights are concerned, especially the climactic Claymore versus Shadow one. Not exactly combat, but warfare in the shadows. Claymore literally running in a circle with a machine gun, the sweat dripping from Curry's brow. It's very in line with some of his Highlander stuff.
Yeah, and I like this because of what these scenes allow Tim Curry to do. Like, he's maniacal, he's a coward clinging to his flashlight and Tommy gun. And remember, he's mostly acting with no one here.
Yeah, it's a gradual progression of the madness he has to fall into.
Yeah. And I like that. And I like that he's essentially hiding behind the Tommy gun, because later, when he is with Khan, he learns that the Shadow is in the building. He's like, oh, is he mad at me? We had a bit of a misunderstanding earlier.
It's great.
So those little things I do like. And in the interview that I watched with Tim Curry, he made a comment about his wardrobe. He's like, oh, this costume designer made this really awesome set of clothes for me and made them ill-fitting and made it look like I'd lived in it for 3 months. And
it's great.
But I think that does tell you a little bit about Claymore, is that he's probably been obsessed with this beryllium sphere project, and he's a slimy, wormy guy.
Yeah.
And Tim Curry plays that. And I think he knows exactly who this character is. And it's just trying to make it interesting and fun.
Also very Highlander-esque is this final battle between the Shadow and Khan. Very cinematic, very wild, especially that final knife plunge.
Yeah, no, that's pretty good. I know we're about to talk about what doesn't work and why, but like after this scene, that's where things, like for me at least, start to fall apart.
Yes.
But if we kept the climax here in this room with the spinning floor and all, and had a worthwhile confrontation between the Shadow and Khan, like, do you think that would have made for a better ending?
Definitely. I think it was really impressive there, and there was a lot of cool moving things there that could have made it really interesting.
Yeah, I didn't like that. Like when the Purba dagger, whenever the Shadow is finally able to control the Purba dagger and hurls it into Khan, like you think, okay, that would be a good final moment to this confrontation, but we don't really get much leading up to that. So Khan gives chase, and that's when we end up in the Hall of Mirrors, and that's where things get a little weird. But yeah, no, I like this set piece, and I wish that we had spent a little more time in it.
Right. But yeah, no, Mulcahy, I think, just to wrap up that topic, I think that he did enough to sort of stylistically bring this movie across. But at the same time, he, in trying to be Tim Burton, he lost a lot of what made him such an impressive singular voice in a lot of his earlier movies. Mm-hmm. And so there wasn't a lot of him there, and therefore there wasn't a lot of queerness to really pick out of this movie.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, like the source material, very much like other superhero comics and pulps and serials of the time, as we said in the previous episode on Flash Gordon, they tend to be very hyper masculine. But yeah, there's really no substantial queer undertones that we could really latch on to here. But so what doesn't work about the Shadow?
A few things. And I'm going to be, because we're being constructive and, we're talking. The pacing for the first 7 minutes is odd. We get one scene of Cranston in power in Tibet, and he's sort of thrown into this temple. And by the time he asks Tolku, do you have any idea who you just kidnapped? Well, the audience doesn't know that. So why should he? So you gotta clue us in on some of that stuff and actually give us a good scope of what is going on before you actually change things. And because it's a lot to set up in the first 7 minutes.
This is such a weird opening because it doesn't give the audience a lot to work with. No. For one, we just know he's a bad guy and he's been brought to this temple and he's going to be reformed, or he's going to be on a path of reformation. It's not a satisfying setup, but I'll talk more about that when we get to it. But
because by the time it was revealed that, the shadowy figure in this temple was Baldwin, I'm like, what, is he playing another character? This is our hero and he's starting out as this sort of villainous type?
Yeah.
Like, I was confused. I was caught off guard.
I was confused too. I mean, even when the first time I saw it, like, I also had that moment where I'm like, is this the same person? Like, is this like a doppelganger? Like, when is this taking place? And so,
confusing.
But yeah. But I got a few points later. I'm going to talk about that.
But we get our 7 minute setup and then we get a title crawl? Really? Okay. You could just have a narrator do that. I mean, we're far enough in that we're kind of like, past the crawl hours.
I can appreciate a title crawl being present, especially in something based on a serial. But yeah, I mean, maybe just start with the crawl and then take us to New York City.
Yeah, we didn't need those first 7 minutes, really, other than like setting up about the knife.
Oh, yeah. That's really about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that could be interspersed in as a sort of flashback in the middle of the movie. I don't know. All right. There's an obvious backdrop on the opening bridge scene. That's very much, that's not a city in the background. That's a backdrop.
That's a translite, people.
Yeah.
But also the Shadow's pronounced nose and altered appearance that we talked about.
Yes.
I mean, does it add anything really?
I mean, if anything, it's really just distracting. Like, I thought it was another actor at first. Then I couldn't stop looking at it during Baldwin's important dialogue. The nose makes him look like Daniel Baldwin.
I would say, or Billy Baldwin.
Right.
Because when you look him up, like, he must have had some work done because he looks like he's perpetually eating something sour.
And then Lamont becoming the Shadow when Wainwright says he's going to put a task force out on the Shadow. Okay, it thematically makes sense, but the way it's done, where the Shadow is based, like, it's literally everything but his eyes is enveloped in shadow. It's so goofy. Like, one of the lighting crew guys went on strike or something. And doing a Jedi mind trick, like many of the things in Flash Gordon and John Carter would do, it seems like it's ripping off Star Wars, even if it probably inspired Star Wars.
Right. Like, even if the Shadow was doing these things way before in the pulps and on the radio, now, and even in 94, it's hard to read those moments without thinking of it as a Jedi mind trick. And largely in, like, how the interaction is written, because he's like, you won't put a task force out on the Shadow. No, I won't put up to torch out on the shadow.
Yeah, no, that's also very much how Jonathan Winters plays it.
Yeah, exactly. I'll say, I do appreciate that they try to make it more of a visual thing with the eye lights and that band of light across the face, a la Morticia Adams. But a better and subtler version of this might be like I was thinking about the remake of The Manchurian Candidate.
Okay.
Whenever the programmed characters hear their names spoken by Meryl Streep, like the picture just gets a little bit brighter and a little more intense.
Oh, okay.
And so it's just a visual cue that's just a little bit more, like I said, it's subtler.
Yeah.
And it gets the same point across. Whereas here, I mean, I think it's a little more stylized in that might be a little bit more in line with lighting techniques of the 30s. I don't know.
Right. Maybe. But I do have to say the lighting in this movie is just atrocious. Some I can maybe write off as stylistic, but some scenes are just too darkly lit. Natural light is nice sometimes, but here it just feels muddied and underdone.
Yeah, and again, like Tim Curry, in that interview I watched with him, he said the cinematographer's approach to lighting the film was to treat it as if it were a black and white film.
And shoot it in black and white.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a bit more obvious in the Cobalt Club scenes. I mean, I didn't find it too offensive, but yeah, I mean, I can see what you mean. Like where it doesn't seem to be over stylized, but yet it doesn't really seem to be very aesthetically pleasing, maybe.
Yeah. Like when I tell people this is a dark movie, I don't mean tonally.
Okay, so you watched this on HBO, right?
Yeah, I watched it on HBO Max.
Yeah, I did too. And I watched the Blu-ray as well. And I don't think it's necessarily the transfer. I think it's just kind of how it was designed to look.
Exactly.
Because, I mean, there are a lot of great films that are just simply very dark in their presentation. Like we were talking about on RMR recently, The Terminator.
Yeah.
Or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comes to mind.
Right.
So yeah, not to say that they were just lit poorly, but they were just, that was intentional. Whereas here, I think it just wasn't.
This wasn't good.
It just wasn't good.
Yeah. There's also a lot of weird editing in this movie. Like the very hard cut from a tender moment with Lamont and Margot to the bomb being rolled into Khan's clutches. Mm-hmm. Or the editor cutting off Margot in mid-sentence to cut to the beginning of Act 3.
That was a very awkward cut.
Like literally, it's like Lamont is going, okay, we got to go. Yeah, but cut. Like she literally goes, Lamont, like she's about to say something, and it just cuts her off. Like the movie doesn't even care what a woman has to say because it's the 40s. It's got to be authentic.
There are a few movies that I've watched where, I mean, you can tell that they were just trying to do last minute edits to save time or, to trim out for the runtime. It looks sloppy. Yeah, I think this is one of those. Like maybe there was just a few more seconds of dialogue or something, and they're like, no, it's got to go. I mean, this movie's already an hour 50 something.
Yeah. It was going to be something like, Lamont, I love you, but we only have 14 hours to save the Earth.
Yes. It was probably something like that.
Right. That mirror climax would be a lot cooler if the CGI wasn't awful.
It's like they tried to do their best with what they had after losing their set in the earthquake, but the editing of this whole sequence is also very jarring.
Yeah, they're hiding a lot.
They're hiding a lot, exactly. How are you reading this scene? I mean, do you think this is part of the payoff of like Lamont's arc, I guess, of him
sort of
excising his association with this warlord, ruler type tyrant figure?
Sort of, but they could have stated something. I mean, if they did, it probably would have been very similar to like, we're not so different, you and I.
Right.
It honestly, this sort of mirroring does tie into this last part, and it also ties into the part I made, the point I made earlier with him taking off the face and revealing Khan, where the Shadow in any other movie would be the villain.
When we open this movie, like we, the audience, are like, wait, this is the hero of the movie? This genocidal opium smuggling concubine fucking warlord all the way from New York City?
Yeah, he doesn't do enough that justifies himself being the hero other than having been in serials 50 years before. I mean, he was the hero then, he's the hero now. Like, let's look at this from another angle. An immigrant who wishes to blow up a city of corrupt, worthless individuals, perhaps pertaining to the predominant whiteness compared to his Asian heritage, or maybe even a tie to the then current war, especially in a time period with Asian discrimination, people being put in internment camps, and punishing a colonizer for slaughtering tons of Asians, is stopped in his tracks by a sinister, shadowy fellow who laughs maniacally from afar, appears in the shadows at all times, and is an alter ego with scary eyes and a big nose. If an Asian guy made this movie, Cranston would be the villain, a colonizer, a trust fund baby, a killer who gets away on his good looks at all times. But instead, the villain must be Shuan Khan, whose final outcome, being removed of his telepathy and locked in a loony bin, seems downright cruel even without that subtext.
I like your take on that. And one, like how they have it set up as is, I think it's hard from the get-go to buy into Lamont Cranston because you can't really, for one, empathize with him. And so you don't really give a shit if he changes or not, or you don't care about whatever kind of atonement that he has to go through to redeem himself for all of his past sins. And this is another point I wanted to make earlier about being naive camp is Kep Bregman or Mulcahy, I can't remember. But they presented this movie as being about atonement, redemption, and reformation. And sure, like the broad strokes are here. Like we mentioned, Cranston wrestling with identifying with Khan, hence the face ripping scene. But it's subconsciously, so we don't really get to see him tempted into any old habits or I guess anything that challenges his life as it is now, like with this purpose to do good in the world and rid it of people like he used to be.
Now I read that face-ripping scene of the sort of theme that this should have had, where the hero should really have the struggling Asian character underneath. That should be the hero, and the movie even realizes it, and it's that sort of dream sequence to let it out.
Yeah.
Maybe deep down, the Shadow and Lamont realizes that he should be the villain. And that even if, Khan wants to blow up New York City, maybe it deserves to be blown up. Maybe a world run by the descendant of Genghis Khan, which it ties into, the fact that history is telling Genghis Khan is the villain. I don't know. But maybe he realizes this sort of theme that I'm putting out. Maybe he knows that he doesn't deserve this heroic moment and that he has to steal it from someone else.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a terrific premise for a new Shadow movie because
Taika Waititi should do it.
Yeah, hell yeah. I mean, you could even steal just a little bit of Watchmen, because that whenever you were talking about that, like maybe I should be the villain. Like maybe this is my place. Right. This is my station.
What Veidt thinks, yeah.
Right. Exactly. So that would be a really cool take on it. Like just enough of a spin to keep it fresh.
It's more than just the face value stuff we have here.
Okay, so this is about the agent thing I was thinking about earlier. Is the agent network thing can be read as, okay, I saved your life, so now you're in service of my needs forever. It's like Mo's got to drive his ass around the rest of his life and lie to his wife about receiving letters from the bowling league and having to go out at all hours of the night. Like he can really keep that up, right? And of course, the Shadow benefits from the help of others, but involuntary servitude, you get the cool ring, a secret code phrase, and a pen that writes in invisible ink, but come on. And after 10 years of service, you get a free beryllium sphere.
Yeah. No, it's definitely problematic. And this is the kind of thing that hasn't really aged well about this movie because it's hard to really like the Shadow. It's hard to really like Lamont Cranston. And Baldwin's performance doesn't help, which we'll get to in a little bit. But it's really the most damning part of the whole movie is that how do I enjoy this movie and enjoy the hero when the hero should be the villain and the villain should be the hero?
Yeah, because I feel like if that tension was more explicit, I feel like that could have made this a lot more interesting.
Yeah, we literally have a movie coming out this year that's about an Asian descendant whose ancestors are a world famous slaughtery villain. That's Shang-Chi, the son of the Mandarin, now trying to be good. So who is to say that that Kirwan Khan isn't similar in a way?
I'd like to see that and even like try to go back to these notes and try to imagine like what, in 2021, like how would the Shadow be made into a viable property now or reinvented for modern times? I don't think it's with James Patterson.
No.
Whenever I saw that book, I was like, this just seems like an awful idea, which I understand. Hey, my background is in English and literature and stuff in part. And I recognize that the Shadow comes out of a robust like literary tradition doing novels about the Shadow. I think that's cool. If you want to do graphic novels, hell yeah, more power to you. But if you want to put this on the big screen, I think that you're going to have to really push the envelope and try to come up with something that's a little bit more, I don't want to say subversive, but one, in line with the times, but also kind of takes the source material and spins it a little bit. So I think what the premise that you presented today, I think is, a really good foundation for like what this could be now.
Yeah.
All right.
To say the least.
So we've talked a little bit about Mulcahy, but there's also the script by David Koepp. And so we'll just spend a moment here. But I mean, this is David Koepp who wrote Toy Soldiers, Death Becomes Her, Jurassic Park, Carlito's Way, Mission Impossible 96, Snake Eyes, Panic Room, Spider-Man 2002, just to name a few.
The script, again, it suffers from the tonal consistency of the whole thing. Sometimes the script is very snappy and very tight and has really good dialogue and back and forths. Other times it's very silly and dumb. And I feel like someone else either touched this up or interfered in some way.
I wonder if it was just the influence of either Alec Baldwin or Marty Bregman, the producer.
Right.
Not really sure, but it does. There are some of those moments that stick out and makes you think, okay, this is not like the rest of the whole. Let's shift gears and move into acting and character work here. So starting off with Alec Baldwin as Lamont Cranston. I mean, we said that this was written for him in mind, and that laugh. I mean, Jesus. In this kind of action movie, like superhero movie, I don't think he's a very effective leading man.
No.
And I don't think he's ever been, really.
He was good in, like, Beetlejuice. But he's always kind of awkward when trying to be an action star. Like, even in the Mission Impossible movies, he's kind of sort of hanging around and doing his thing. But I can't not see Alec Baldwin.
Yeah. I know, like, Cranston has some Bruce Wayne in him. That came out wrong. But
no, that's okay. He's gay, but he's not that gay.
Just his presence here is troublesome.
He's trying to be Bruce Wayne, but a lot doesn't work. Like, I know the part was written for him, but he still feels miscast. And he still feels like the biggest problem with the movie, because sometimes he's being too suave, sometimes he's being too intimidating. So he doesn't work in a lot of this. He only barely works as a comedy foil in some parts. Mm-hmm. He just doesn't fit for what this movie asks him to do a lot, even if it's asked for him. The assignment was made with him in mind, and he still flounders it. That just says a lot about him as an actor.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because, I mean, I think Mulcahy is a pretty good director, and so I wonder, like, how much of this is, blame on the part of Mulcahy to get something better out of Baldwin. I don't know. Then we have Penelope Ann Miller as Margot Lane, who also played a Margot in 1997 in The Relic.
Interesting.
But yeah, I mean, she's been around for a while. She's good, I think.
Yeah, no, I just saw her recently in watching the movie The Freshman, which is very underrated and very cool. She steals all her scenes, and this is a few years after that when Hollywood tries to figure out what to do with her. And to be honest, Penelope Ann Miller seems a bit miscast in this movie. But I think she powers through it, and I think that she succeeds enough to distract from the fact that she's miscast here. I don't know if she really had superhero female lead in her repertoire, but she works here for the most part. And again, her recounting her dream in the one scene sexily is worth it. She just has her moments where she really stands out. It only sort of works.
I think she's fine here. I think that, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think she might be, or I think someone else might have done a slightly better job here, but I guess like her role in the script and what's being asked of her to carry the story forward. I like that she's not simply a damsel in distress.
Exactly.
And so I like that about her, but I think that she does have a little bit of spunk to her that I like. And she's a little bit playful. She's not just swooning and fawning over Lamont.
Exactly.
How she interprets the character, I think works for me.
Yeah, no, it works for the most part. Sometimes I feel like either she's better than it or she's not fully equipped for it. But she makes the most of it.
Yeah. And then John Lone as Khan.
Oh, yeah. A villainous performance worthy of James Hong in Big Trouble in Little China. Mm-hmm. I like how he goes very big and very almost sensationalized because he makes the most of a very simple kind of character. I mean, this movie, we've danced about it, but this movie actually does pretty well in terms of representation for Asian actors. And Lone gets to, as an Asian actor playing this Asian villain, and he gets to be this very respectable, intimidating character that isn't really at the expense of his Asianness.
Right. And, he gets second billing in this movie, but I wasn't able to find one single bit of press he did to promote it. Because Baldwin kept Miller, Mulcahy, Tim Curry, who got fourth billing, by the way, like they did. And so I wonder why he was absent or if he was even asked.
I mean, all those guys are white, so,
yeah,
that may have something to do with it. But I think his acting here is really good. He knows exactly what to bring to it. I even think his acting when he's stabbed in the chest is excellent. Very big, very, very Mulcahy.
Mm-hmm. And we'd be remiss without mentioning Ian McKellen as Reinhardt Lane.
Yeah, Ian McKellen's in this movie. We haven't really talked about him a lot because in the first couple scenes, McKellen's American accent is actually really good. I wasn't expecting it to be.
Yeah.
And I think of everyone in this cast, at least in those initial scenes, I think McKellen fits the tone of the serials the most. Something about his pattern, his way of speaking, really fits well with a radio character or even an upstanding dad character in a 40s or 50s program in general.
Yeah, I like that there's this running joke about him being colorblind.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
That's cool.
It's almost climactic in a way, the detail of that, where he cuts what he thinks is a green wire, but it's a red. So.
Right, yeah, that's a cool detail.
After his first few scenes, the film proceeds to do next to nothing with him for the rest of it. Like he's just sort of brainwashed by Khan and doesn't get to do a lot of acting.
Yeah, he's just working on this bomb. That's pretty much it. Like he is in Khan's, he's in the service of Khan, and that's his role for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
But
kind of wasted here.
He's kind of wasted, but he's good, and I agree. Like he's kind of, what's the word? Mousy, I guess. He has the glasses and the mustache, like just his appearance and his mannerisms. I think, as you said, I think they fit very well here. And Peter Boyle, it's Bo.
Peter Boyle, of course. Holy crap. Pretty strictly comic relief, but he does well with it.
He's not in it as much as I remember.
No, he's just, he helps him out. He doesn't get a lot to do, but he has some scenes and he does well.
And he's not like in Batman, like he's not the butler character, but he's not necessarily the sidekick either.
No.
And so he's somewhere in between, is just this helper figure. He is also one of the Shadow's like trusted agents, he is essentially his chauffeur, but but he also was saved by the Shadow. We don't know what happened to him, but he's like, yeah, I owe the guy. Yeah. And so he's very loyal.
Okay.
Okay. And, then Tim Curry is Farley Claymore.
Yes. Now, in some of his early scenes where he's just, he's just Lane's assistant, he feels like he's shifting into his very artificial American/Californian accent. I've only heard this on one other occasion, and that is The Pebble and the Penguin. Didn't really work there either.
I strongly dislike his accent in this movie because I feel like it goes in and out very frequently.
Yes.
Not that it's a big quibble, but why not just make him British?
Yeah. He's Tim Curry. What else is he going to be?
Yeah.
Other than Romanian.
Oh, right. He came on this movie for a reason.
Yes. He stated in interviews that he took the role so he could work with Ian McKellen again, the Salieri to his Mozart in the production of Amadeus that I believe is on Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
It puts the scene where he gloats up against Dr. Lane into new light. Now he gets to be the sniveling one.
Yeah.
And I do think his best scene is his late showdown with the Shadow, which we discussed earlier. At first cowardly, then wildly shooting machine gun rounds while laughing maniacally. It's a classic Tim Curry moment. Also reminds me of how great of a Joker Curry could have been.
Yeah, there was a moment, there's a close-up of him, and I think it's where sweat is running down his brow, and he just has this almost dead look where you can tell there's gears spinning behind his skull, but he's just a total enigma. He looks terrifying.
Yes, he can do that.
He can do that. I like that we see him here as not exactly a henchman and not exactly a villain per se.
He's a mini boss almost.
He's a mini boss. Yes.
he's still a very good villain in this. Obviously you got to have Tim Curry as a villain.
Yeah.
He still gives it. He still delivers.
All right. And then we get Jonathan Winters as Wainwright.
It's just cool that he's here. He's done enough comedic work over the rest of his career. He's done Mork and Mindy. He's done It's a Mad World. He's done countless radio and TV. The fact that he gets to be the Commissioner Gordon type is kind of cool. It's Jonathan Winters. See if he brought his trunk with him.
In interviews with Alec Baldwin, he mentioned that Jonathan Winters was essentially the on-set entertainment.
Oh, good.
And then lastly, before we get to our et cetera bit here, James Hong.
Yeah, James Hong is in the first scene of the film where he comes into Cranston's sort of temple of sorts and pleads for his life. It's a nice sort of pass of the torch to him, from him to John Lone as sort of great, Asian villains. And also seeing him and Al Leong in the same shot makes me wistful for Big Trouble in Little China, because Al Leong was one of the strong henchmen in that movie as well.
Yeah.
But no, he's good in his one scene here. I wish the movie would have done a little bit more from him, because he's a great actor. If you've seen him in Blade Runner or Kung Fu Panda or Big Trouble in Little China, you know how good he is, and I wish he would have done a little more. But it's cool that he was here.
Yeah, and I think he's finally getting his star on the Walk of Fame.
Good. He deserves it.
Yeah, I know people were really lobbying for that for a long time, so I'm glad he finally got it.
No, he's excellent. He's very versatile. We have some other bit parts in here, because there's a lot of really interesting bit parts.
Mm-hmm.
The message taker, Burbank, is played by Andre Gregory, of all people, the iconoclast and playwright. Somebody, I wrote this and I realized it was very much a Forrest Gump kind of thing. So somebody made a movie about him having a dinner once. I don't know what it was so great about it. Because just to think that Forrest Gump would have any knowledge of My Dinner with Andre anyway.
Right.
Forrest Gump, film guy. A while back, I was watching an Ozu film. Lieutenant Dan got me tickets for Hausu.
Would he have been one of those Fellini heads?
Federico Fellini was one of my all-time favoritist filmmakers. Me and Lieutenant Dan used to watch Amarcord and gawk at the busty shopkeeper all the time.
The one of my favorite bit parts here is Max Wright as one of the museum curators. Some of you might recognize him as the dad from Alf, or the manager of Central Perk and Friends, or at least he was for a hot minute. He was the subject of a crack sex scandal in the late 90s, early aughts. Reportedly, he picked up homeless men twice a week and paid them $100 for sex, and even appeared in a homemade gay porno tape with two men smoking crack at 74.
Well, at least he kept active. Those 74-year-olds really need to, keep moving. He kept moving all right.
He sure did.
Was his poor name Gordon Shumway by any chance?
Oh my God.
Just in case.
Oh man.
Anyway.
Especially now, just looking back.
Yeah, that was a show, looking back now. That was a hit.
It was a hit back in the day, but everybody loved watching Alf. But then now you hear about just what a fucking nightmare it was to make that show and how everybody hated to be involved with it. It makes you see it in a new light now, but anyway, I digress.
Yeah. Both of the guards in front of Ian McKellen's office went on, are famous in some way. The guard on the right, who suggests pizza and initiates the conversation about food, is Abraham Ben Ruby, best known for ER and best known by me for playing Thor, the bumbling henchman in George of the Jungle. The other one is Steve Hinter, best known as Kenny Bonilla on Seinfeld. It's gold, Jerry.
It's gold. Where's my soup? There's some good TV actors here, like Ethan Phillips as the museum security guard converts Smeets and makes him commit suicide. He plays Neelix from Star Trek Voyager, if any of you care. But he's a good character actor. He shows up from time to time.
No, of course. And then the sailor that Khan makes jump off the Empire State Building is, as we talked about, Patrick Fischler, a character actor best known for stints on Mad Men and Lost, and most recently Scalabrine and Taylor's Happy.
Yeah, and he's also in David Lynch's stable of actors.
Yes. I haven't even seen Mulholland Drive, but I do know that he is one of the more gifable moments from Mulholland Drive.
Yes.
He's screaming like he's gotten shot in the leg.
Yes. And we just have a tiny bit here about the score as we move into music.
Jerry Goldsmith does the score, as he would in this era, and he does a fine job.
Yeah.
And the selections and arrangements of the soundtrack are done by someone named Jellybean Benitez. I don't think that was his birth name.
Jellybean Benitez.
That sounds more like an artist on The Mask.
It does, actually. You have a few pop music notes here.
I do.
I didn't think we would, but I knew
there was a couple.
I knew there would be one at least, but
yeah, but there's a couple in here. In the Cobalt Club, there's a song called "Some Kind of Mystery," performed by a singer named Snow Loren. It's a song penned for the movie by perennial Oscar loser Diane Warren. She's a songwriter type who's been nominated for 12 Oscars and has not won. Which means advantage, Randy Newman. Some Kind of Mystery is trying to be like Face to Face or even Sooner or Later, but doesn't even compare. Yes, that's right. I am preferring an element from Dick Tracy to something like this. And find out why soon on the Patreon feed.
Yes.
Then, as we focus on Margot's table, we hear, what's this? A Kenny G song? Remember is the name of the song. It's very clearly a Kenny G composition. 5 months after this movie's release, Kenny G would release a Christmas album. I recall Norm Macdonald having a very famous line about that. Kenny G has a Christmas album. Hey, happy birthday, Jesus. Hope you like crap.
It's not surprising now that a Kenny G song is in this movie. I mean, it kind of is because it's a period piece, but at this time, Kenny G was everywhere, like on the radio.
Yes.
You couldn't get away from him. It's just funny now, like looking back.
Yeah, you were into that. That was before I was born. That's all your generation.
Yeah. Above. I know, man. I don't know what was wrong with us.
What was with the all and Kenny G? It's like I don't know. There's probably going to be shit that I'm going to have to explain to other generations.
And Yanni was a thing. Remember Yanni?
Oh God, my mom was a big Yanni fan. Bunch of his CDs in this house.
Yeah.
There's a recurring motif in this movie involving the song, the standard lullaby of Broadway. The security guard whistles it as the museum people leave, and also Khan sings it as he taunts Patrick Fischler to his death. And then the credit song is called Original Sin. It's written by Jim Steinman, sung by Taylor Dayne. That's an odd combination. Taylor Dayne, pop songstress of the late 80s. Jim Steinman, balladeer of the 70s. Jim Steinman, I don't know how much knowledge I have of Jim Steinman stuff. He was Meatloaf's chief songwriting man.
Ah, okay.
And all of the great Meatloaf songs of that time were written by him, as well as other songs like Making Love Out of Nothing at All by Air Supply, Holding Out for a Hero by Bonnie Tyler, and also Total Eclipse of the Heart by Bonnie Tyler. He was a big songwriter in the 70s and 80s. He also wrote all of the songs, I believe, that were in Streets of Fire.
Oh, okay.
Original Sin is decent. It's also trying to be like Face to Face, but it's fine. Taylor Dayne sort of fits in it, more of a Madonna type, but I guess this fits.
I will let the credits play through and listen to this song, and I prefer the Madonna tunes and Dick Tracy.
Oh yeah, Sooner or Later is a much better song.
Yeah, Sooner or Later is great. I actually like my favorite is
it the one that Pacino joins in on?
No. Oh, What Can You Lose?
Okay, got it.
I think
that's which is basically a good question to ask considering with the revenue of Dick Tracy. What can you lose? Lots,
apparently. Oh, I can't wait to talk about that one.
Oh, man.
I bet Lewis can't either. I bet he's going to avoid it altogether.
Yep.
All right. So just a few memorable or key scenes maybe we haven't talked about.
Yeah, this is very simple, but Khan convincing the cab driver, played by Larry Hankin, to run into the gas truck. Demented, well-edited, and a spectacle even in a minor moment.
It's a great moment. And just the way that Larry Hankin plays it, because Khan tells him, "Oh, you're out of gas." And he looks like, "Oh, yeah, you're right." And it's full. And he's like, "Yeah, thanks a lot." And just
so he runs into a gas truck.
Yeah, and explodes like a Johnny Cab. Yeah. It's great.
Also, the first scene between Khan and Cranston, John Lone is excellent here. Not even Baldwin's comparatively pedestrian reads can stop him from really impressing me. I did, though, laugh at the tie advice bit. 45th and Madison, you are a barbarian.
One of the bits here about the tie, about like where Cranston purchased the tie.
Where'd you get it?
It's a spoof on like product placement during the radio airing of The Shadow. So
precursor to Truman Show.
So I've read, but yeah, exactly.
We also have the scene where Margot comes to Lamont's place to kill the Shadow. The moment she realizes the wheels start turning, and that's fantastic. Penelope Ann Miller's best work is in this scene. How do you know I won't tell anyone who you really are? It's some good stuff there.
yeah, like this would have been a good moment for him to like try to kill her or something.
Yeah.
And when it's like the, his evil side comes out. I'm just being silly, but but actually that would have been kind of cool because she's being very confident and saying, yeah, like, what are you going to do about it? Like,
yeah,
how do you know? And
it's a good little, it's a good midway point for the film, but it's also a good shift in Lamont's ideology.
Right. Because he realizes that she has some kind of psychic ability that he says that she doesn't really understand yet. And so in a way he sees her as a threat, even tells Mo in the taxi cab that I can't see her again because it's too dangerous for me. And so I would have liked a little bit more tension there, but as is, I think it's fine.
Yeah. I also like the scene where Margot changes and convinces Lamont to keep him around. Another great Penelope Ann Miller scene. She's as sexy as she is compelling here. This actually works as a good, well-written comic scene with the sort of blunt, realistic writing that the rest of this movie tends to lack.
Right. And this is also, if I'm not mistaken, the scene where he's like, oh, I might have something you can wear in my closet.
Yeah.
And he offers her a dress that belonged to, what, Aunt Rose or something?
Yeah, Aunt Rose. Sure. Of course a billionaire playboy has a bunch of dresses hanging around in his wardrobe. Sure.
Or maybe he just likes to go out on
Mrs. Lamont Fire.
Mrs. Lamont Fire. Maybe the Shadow isn't his only alter ego. Maybe he goes out on the weekends.
Oh my God, that would be a great movie where he goes out and intimidates the world as dressed as a woman.
Stops by and has a drink at Gay Mo's. Oh Lord,
you brought that back. I didn't expect that.
Yeah, I didn't either.
How about let's change this week?
Got to get Harvey Fierstein in that.
Sorry, I'm late. I can't really do Harvey.
Harvey Fierstein is Gay Mo. That'd be great.
Because straight Mo is taken.
Oh, look, it's Lamona again. Hi, Lamona. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Sorry.
The extra of this movie award goes to the only realist in this entire movie. The guy who, when Lamont pleads with him to tell him what the name of the invisible hotel building is, walks away looking strangely at him, muttering lunatic. I don't think that was an extra. I think he was just giving Baldwin a piece of his mind.
That would have been something. Like they just were off from a distance with a camera and was just like, hey, Alec, just go up and talk to that guy. And he's like, because clearly there's not a building there. It's just an empty lot. So just ask him, hey, what's with this building? You a lunatic?
You are a rude, thoughtless little pig. There's a very famous online clip of him cursing out his daughter, I believe.
Oh, okay. All right. I do remember that. All right. Well, that is The Shadow from 1994. Final thoughts?
This movie doesn't really work. A lot of the pieces don't fit together for me. Alec Baldwin feels miscast. Penelope Ann Miller is good, but still feels miscast. The hero should be the villain and vice versa. It feels like it's trying to be Batman, but is too goofy to be a Burton Batman. There are some very good moments in this, mostly courtesy of John Lone and Tim Curry. And there are some very interesting ways of shooting this that Russell McKay has. But all in all, it's kind of a mess and kind of too goofy for its own good at times.
Like I said earlier, like this is one that I remembered fondly from my childhood and is one of few that I've revisited and didn't feel quite as fondly afterwards. Like I know there's that attitude that there's some things you should just leave in the past, childhood favorites or what have you. But I'm really glad that we covered this for the show because even though there are things that clearly don't work and there are aspects of it that are ineffective or could have been configured a little bit differently, I think this movie it's just okay. If you like this particular genre and this period, I would say that you would probably enjoy this more like if you got like the early 90s superhero action stuff. Like I think you're not going to like it as good as Batman or Batman Returns, clearly. But I think there is enough of a spectacle here to keep you at least somewhat interested for the duration of the movie. It's probably going to feel a little long, like it's like an hour 50, hour 55.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth a watch. I mean, I think there is some good stuff here. For the most part, I think there were just a lot of things on the front end that didn't work in their favor. Like I think they were setting themselves up to not be able to have the foundation to build this franchise that they wanted, that they imagined that this could be. But I think today, like having looked at this and with fresh eyes, I think that we've probably written at least a premise for a better iteration for 2021, at least.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what somebody could do with it now, if they could do any better with it.
Yeah.
Coming soon on video cassette.
Some say he's a legend.
Zorro was a servant of the people. He did what was needed. Now he's needed again.
Others, a ghost.
Be careful, señorita. There are dangerous men about.
Some say he fights for justice.
There are some who would call him heroic.
Others for revenge.
All that playing with swords, shooting guns, racing around on horses. Such sweaty pursuits are hardly the work of a gentleman.
No one has seen his face.
Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. I had impure thoughts about a man.
Lustful?
Yes, lustful.
But everyone knows his mark.
Not bad.
The only sin would be to deny what your heart truly feels. Not bad at all.
Search everything!
You know, Zorro. It could be anywhere. Did you miss me?
The Mask of Zorro.
It's time to give a special shout out to our casual and preferred renters over on Patreon. Lewis, Mike, and Jack from Random Movie Roulette, Mondo, Pete, Ryan M, Ryan S, Jacob and Tav from Test Pattern, Naomi and Rich from Bloody in Love, James, Zach, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
And shout out to our new preferred renter, Jordan's dad.
Thanks, Dad. Means a lot.
Thank you all so much for supporting the show. Your patronage helps us to offset the cost of hosting and producing the show. And if you're not a patron but are interested in becoming one, head over to patreon.com/VericonVideo for more information about all the great perks you can get starting at $2 a month, such as bonus episodes not available on our main feed, commentaries, and a super cool gift pack loaded with Vericon Video merch and other little surprises.
Remember to rate and review the show on iTunes. If you have questions, suggestions, or just want to tell us what you think of the show, drop us a line at vericonvideo@gmail.com.
You can also DM us on Twitter at Vericon Video, or you can call the Vericon Video hotline and leave us a message at 312-620-5560. You can also reach us telepathically.
Yes.
If you believe in that sort of thing. That's all for today, but we'll be back soon to talk about more forgotten and unforgettable movies pulled from the shelves right here at Vericon Video. So long, everybody.
Thank you all, and remember, the shadow knows.
Goodbye, Vietnam! That's right. I'm history. I'm out of here. I got the lucky ticket home, baby.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Jenny.
Bye-bye, boys.
Have fun storming the castle. Bye-bye.
Do take good care of yourself.
What is this, your farewell speech? Going home. Have a good trip.
Hasta la vista, baby. I have to go.
Adieu. Auf Wiedersehen. Gesundheit.
See you later.